Hello, this is Ariel Perino, and I will be doing a speech about Anne Boleyn, and here's my audience.
Okay.
I'm going to be discussing the second wife of King Henry VIII. Her name is Anne Boleyn, and we're going to discuss her role in the shift from the Roman Catholic Church and to the Church of England, and how she was able to get King Henry VIII to marry her. So even though that it's been 500 years since Anne Boleyn was the Queen of England, her legacy and scandals still shock and intrigue us today. However, she was more than the sum of her scandals. She was the second wife of King Henry VIII, mother to Queen Elizabeth I, and the catalyst to the Reformation of the Church of England. Eric Ives, who has written 2 biographies on Anne Boleyn, states that she's the most important queen consort England has ever had. Now, at the time of her birth, baptismal records were not kept, so there's great debate as to when she was actually born. It's dates as far flung as 1499 to 1512 have been suggested, but today most biographers say she was born around 1501. She was born to Thomas, eldest son of Sir William Boleyn, and her mother was daughter to Thomas Howard, Earl of Surrey. She had 2 siblings that lived to adulthood, and they were George and Mary. Now, Anne spent part of her childhood at the court of the Archduchess Margaret. She was probably around 12 to 13 years old, as that was the minimum age for a filet d'honneur. She developed an interest in the arts. It was there that she was exposed to Protestant views. She was then transferred to the household of Mary, Henry's VIII's sister, who was married to the King Louis of France. And this is where Anne learned fluent French, and Anne's sister's Mary was already in her attendance, so she followed her sister. However, when Louis died, Boleyn returned to England with Mary Tudor, who was King Henry VIII's daughter. And Anne returned to France to attend Claude, the new Queen French, and Anne remained in France for the next 6 to 7 years. Now, the introduction to King Henry's court. Anne returned to England around 1521, and then she went to court to attend Queen Catherine, King Henry VIII's wife. Her first recorded appearance at court was on March 1st, 1522 at a masquerade. Anne was quite popular in the English court. It was said that she had a wonderful singing voice, she was an excellent dancer, and she had a great fashion sense. Some reports state that she was a great beauty. There was even a silly legend that Anne had been so beautiful that the noblemen of England fought duels over who could own a vial of her bathwater. Others said she was not the handsomest woman, though. Now, she had many potential suitors, including her cousin Lord James Butler. However, she fell in love with Lord William Percy, and he was in love with her as well, but he ended up marrying someone else at the insistence of his family. Now, there was a long-standing rumor that she had 6 fingers, she was a satanic witch, and she had the mole the size of a strawberry on her neck and a 3rd nipple, based on propaganda written 40 years after her death, though, so that can be taken with a grain of salt. Now, at this point, King Henry started to woo Anne to try to make her become his mistress, but she was not having any of that. Because he had already had her sister as his mistress, so she didn't want to follow in line with that, and she didn't want to ruin her reputation. Now, King Henry was desiring to pursue Anne, and he was also desiring to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who was his wife. Catherine only had one surviving daughter, Mary. All the others were stillborn after she had reached menopause by 1524. Both King and his chief minister, Cardinal Wolsey, used the fact that Catherine was previously married to Henry's brother, Prince Arthur, who died in 1502, as a basis to nullify their marriage. In Leviticus, it forbids marriages between a brother-in-law and a widowed sister-in-law. Initially, Henry pursued Anne to become one of his mistresses, and when she was not thrilled about it because it would have ruined her reputation. She and her family had higher ambitions, and it was also said that she, since he already had sexual relations with her sister, now all of this will be important later as well. Now, she refuses advances initially before eventually agreeing to marry him. She did refuse to consummate the relationship until his annulment from Queen Catherine was complete, which took 6 years to accomplish. During that time, Cardinal Wolsey lost favor with the king because it was taking too long, and it was his fault that Pope would not grant the annulment. And because it was taking so long, Anne believed that he was purposely trying to prevent the annulment. And so, while initially she was a supporter of his, she didn't do anything to help his cause when he became out of favor with the king. So they had to come up with a new way to get the annulment. Now, Anne increasingly began to resent the Pope, and then started lending her support to those who were sympathetic to the new Protestant religion. She even had Protestant texts smuggled into the country, and she took up the cause to save evangelicals and preachers condemned to burn to death for heresy. She had strong reformist views. She championed seeing the Bible printed in English rather than Latin, and she wanted more money to be diverted away from the church to hospitals and schools. She had Father Thomas Cranmer promoted to a position of power because he and others thought that the king should be the head of the national church. Anne also put illegal books that argued for the split from Rome directly into King Henry's hands, which planted the seed in King Henry's head. In 1532, on a trip to France, it was recorded that they were married and their relationship was consummated. On January 25th, the second ceremony was held, and this time Anne was pregnant. The Archbishop Thomas Cranmer ruled that the marriage of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon had never been legal, so she was banished from court and kept away from her daughter. A very obviously pregnant Anne was then crowned queen at Westminster Abbey in early summer of 1533, and in September she gave birth to Princess Elizabeth, who was the future Queen of England. Now, at this point, like I said, in September of 1533, Anne gave birth to Princess Elizabeth. Obviously, having a girl was not ideal because she had promised King Henry a boy. But she was a devoted mother. As queen, she had many successes. She was extremely generous to charities. She exerted significant influence over foreign policy. She did have many difficulties as well. Once they were married, Henry wasted no time in taking a series of mistresses. She also had a series of miscarriages, one a boy, which led to King Henry yelling at her and telling her it was her fault, the baby. Because of her involvement with many changes that were happening, she also gained a lot of enemies. There was a faction of conservative Catherine loyalists, the Duke of Suffolk and her uncle Duke of Norfolk, whom she hated, and her stepdaughter Princess Mary. Her most significant enemy was Thomas Cromwell, who replaced Cardinal Wolsey as the king's advisor. After the closures of some monasteries, their relationship deteriorated. He despised Anne and even went as far as to befriend Henry's mistress, Jane Seymour, and her family. The final straw was when Anne suggested that the funds from the closing of the monasteries and the nunneries should go to building hospitals, while Cromwell thought the funds should go to the royal treasury. King Henry grew frustrated with Anne and had to find a way to get out of this marriage too, because she kept having a series of stillborns. And May 2nd of 1536, Anne was arrested. She was accused of committing adultery with a palace musicians and one of her husband's friends, Henry Norris, which both he and Anne denied. She was then taken to the Tower of London. She was forbidden from sending any messages, and she was attended by servants that were loyal to Cromwell. The list of whom she was accused of having an adulterous affair grew to 7. She was also accused of having an incestuous affair with her brother George. 5 men, including her brother George, were tried and found guilty and were beheaded on May 17th. Anne was found guilty as well. Anne did not know how long it would be before her execution. When discussing the upcoming execution with a servant, she allegedly joked, "I heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck." And she put her hands around her throat and burst out laughing. and was executed May 19th, 1536 by a French swordsman. Now, in conclusion, Anne was a key political figure in the shift from Roman Catholicism to the Church of England and transformed the rules for royal marriages. No longer were the days of papal rule when it came to British matters. Even at her death, her legacy is still felt today.